This talk invites teachers, students and artists for a journey into the hills and islands of indigenous tribal storytelling to listen to the memories of the ancestors. The oral traditions are a sophisticated method of preserving and transmitting knowledge from one generation to the next. Therefore, I will seek out the elders and I will examine their instructions. I will dig deep or burrow, animal-like, to contact the sublime interpretations. The talk is about communication, transactions, and mediations. It is about translations, negotiations, and relations with a more than human world. It is about the presentation of parallel worldviews. This is about journeys, transitions, and the transformative impact of storytelling. It is an adventure into a new old way of thinking, and it requires preparation to enter into unfamiliar areas of deconstruction, analysis, and interpretation, and into uncomfortable, unsettling spaces where animism represents an antitype to the modern Western worldview. These are stories about crossing generations, times, and places. We will meet ancestral characters and hear colonial and post-colonial voices. In the process, we should ask, what happens when the voices at the margins are silenced? What happens when the elders stop speaking and the rest of us stop listening? This is Tamamindu, a traditional Gallo priest. We will meet him again later when he says a prayer for the animated film. In the character of stories, the narrative of this journey is an epic of twists and turns. Storytelling is a tradition for indigenous peoples that encompasses all aspects of culture and society. However, this is not to be confused by interpreting indigenous knowledge as a universal concept amongst various societies when it is entirely dependent on place. We must challenge the dominant colonial descriptions and resist all reductive strategies in the search for sublime meaning. The worldview of Cartesian objectivism established a dichotomy between mechanical, unthinking matter and pure, thinking mind. This was the separation of nature and culture, the separation of minerals, plants, and animals from humans and God, which turned them into mere automatons, available to humans to manipulate and exploit. The worldviews in which there seemed to be no division between nature and culture, in which objects, nature, or the entire cosmos are perceived of as being alive, are those of the animist.
Hello, gondole.
A definition by E.B. Tyler of animism as the elementary form of religion practiced by humanity's ancestors is well known. It was the other, and it did not belong to us. A critique of the colonial underpinnings of this motivated scholarship to come up with revised understandings of the term. Graham Harvey suggested pan-spiritism of all living beings, as well as some inanimate objects such as stones and the deceased. Philip de Scola spoke of human kinship relations with natural beings, of subjectivity, intelligence, emotions, and the abilities to communicate. For Tim Ingold, animacy is the dynamic and transformative potential of the entire field of relations within which all kinds of beings continually and reciprocally bring one another into existence. David Abram highlighted the reciprocal relationship between the subject and the object, the perceiver and the perceived, which was the ongoing interchange between entities. Arving Alowel said that for the Ojibwa, some entities are imbibed with life, not all. Some stones speak, but not all. Some animals belong to the class other than human persons. It is a worldview focused on relationships and connections rather than separate entities and fragments. From this background of animism, I look into the storytelling traditions. For an oral culture, a particular place is an active participant in the human events that occur there. Experience is constantly adjusting to the continually shifting terrain. Some of the ancestral stories may be termed as functional myths, which serve to explain certain observed characteristics. All the early stories about the ancient times in which humankind was becoming established recount that there was never an idealized romantic relationship with nature. It was something that had to be negotiated and worked upon. These stories encouraged humankind's sense of reciprocity and relationship with the animate natural world, which influences and limits the activities of most indigenous tribal peoples. However, similar to misconceptions about animism, that it represented a naive way of misunderstanding reality, the stories are also misconstrued as naive explanations, whereas they are instructive, immersive, and a sophisticated method of memory to preserve and pass on knowledge from one generation to the next. As Cacciabaldi reiterated, the oral traditions that exist from time immemorial provide ways to live with and be responsible to the earth. Following the interpretations by Carl Jung, the tendency is to regard the characters of mythical legendary stories as archetypes. This would place Tapeng the Bat, who appears in the stories of Abutani, into the role of the trickster, which is also described in stories from other cultures around the world. However, we need to be alert to the hazards of universalizing indigenous knowledge and reading it through the language of an inappropriate, mismatched cultural lens. Why not accept these stories and characters at face value? This would dissolve the temptation for reductions into oppositions, which are neither a defining feature of the indigenous narratives nor of a shamanic journey.
No jadi tamche bodi tamche renurate. Mo jadi agala beka. Anga cherulu tua kambulu tulo jadi pauma bodi pauma chungkum nende. Nuri kulo nuri pekumam rokira ne bache tumi kulo setum pekumam rokira to.
Cacciabaldi tells us that these kinds of stories contain a decolonizing philosophy. Regarding the iconic character, Coyote First Person of Native American literature, as a metaphor, his role in unsettling Western ideas about the world is obscured. Similarly, Tapeng the Bat, who is a liminal character, can be viewed not only as a trickster, but as a complex embodiment of indigenous decolonizing epistemologies. It requires awareness and courage to recognize the erasure and silencing of indigenous knowledge that prevents challenges to colonial claims to land and history. I refer to colonial parallelism, outlined by Tuck and Young, which portrays commonality between epistemologies that erases culturally based knowledge and informs the mentality that we are all one world through universal experiences which parallel westernized ideas of how the world works.
So we are literally standing on an inverted forest. And so we have to consider this. It is really a miracle, an artificial, a humanly made island or land, which only is, of course, possible with the use of natural resources with the forest. So we are, in fact, here in a great symbiosis with the forest. Without the forest, this fantastic city would not be possible without the sacrifice of the forest.
The
story of man-tiger spirit is common to several of the Naga tribes. Angami, Mao, Chakasang, Sema, etc. 3 brothers emerged into the world from a cave. They emanated from the womb of the earth. Im Song Ma writes, "In the Naga tradition, the mother in the story represents the earth, who is the embodiment of the Supreme Being. Spirit is a regent of the Supreme Being, and the man represents the entire human race." Many legends have affirmed that at one time all spirits and animals, including human beings and birds, lived together in harmony, talking with one another in a language that they could all understand. He added that these stories talk about how the process of identification or separation started when the 3 brothers, spirit, tiger, and man, separated from their mother. According to the Naga tradition, their mother was the earth. We can argue that the stories represent 3 levels of consciousness, and Ma felt that the fact that the human being was weaker than the tiger was important. Therefore, their elder brother, Spirit, helped the man to win the contest. After all, Spirit always takes the side of the weakest and the poor. However, this may be a concept derived from Christianity, which is now the dominant belief of the Naga communities.
There are some non-physical beings who are not good to us. They are kind of against human beings. But when you, in this particular folktale about man, tiger, and spirit, or I would say Temie, Teku, and Terumie, this Terumie is favorable to man.
The good spirit.
The good spirit.
In this context.
So it is not exactly God, but the creator as such.
They say that there is a kinship association of the tiger and the Wancho chief, the Wangham. They are said to share the same spirit, so that when tiger is hurt, the Wangham's health will suffer. Perhaps it's the common idea about the power of the tiger and the chief that links them.
Wanchunyu, ko, Khashangam, Enwangham, Sangu, Asaba, Kim, Gasau Chongpo, Asam Chongpo, Kimishu Manhamapo, Kimagang Gangtan Manhampo, Kimaga, Kanu Kamanhampo, Kimakam Yugai Manhamapo, Apuma, Uganpamula.
In the past, the same rituals would be performed for the death of a tiger as for a human being. At the next site of research, the scene is very different.
Transformations between human and animals, non-human animals, is the characteristic of the Venetian motives, stories, architecture, symbols. So we are right in this whole non-dualistic microcosm, which is creating this incredible beauty.
We are encountering, listening to, and reading creation stories. These stories feature a race of beings that exist before humans. As David Abram wrote, in the stories, when the first people transform and become part of the world that is now inhabited by humans, they also endow animals with their spirit, and these animals become intimately tied to human beings as their ancient ancestors. In North American native traditions, we read that the first people were coyote, eagle, and hummingbird, and that they were all escaping from a catastrophe on the earth. I first came to the stories from the Andamanese people through the colonial literature by Alfred Radcliffe Brown at SOAS, and also at the Anthropological Survey of India in Port Blair. The narrative reflects the language of the time, but it was certainly an astounding achievement. How did Radcliffe Brown have this unprecedented access to the stories and culture? And how could it be verified, as there are no storytellers left who can recollect the stories? Radcliffe Brown wrote, "At first, so the story runs, animals and human beings were one, were not distinguished. Then came the discovery of fire. It is equally, according to the legend, the lack of fire, or the lack of ability to make use of fire, that makes the animals what they are, that cuts them off from participation in human life. It was believed that the actions of the ancestors, and of humans in general, impacted the land and the climate. The character Biliku, who represents a supernatural being, or deity of the storms, would get angry and have to be pacified. It was a constant process of negotiation and renewal. The knowledge of the diverse properties of particular animals, plants, and places is preserved by being woven into stories. The storyteller recites the story about a particular plant, animal, or element to recall the accumulated knowledge regarding that entity and its relation to the human community. The stories and songs connect the tellers and the listeners to the land. In the Andaman Islands, we saw what happens when the elders are silenced and we stop listening to them. Instead of removing the story from its context, can we focus on revitalizing, enlivening, and reanimating it? In the Wancho Hills, the pace of life is changing so rapidly that the younger people do not have time to listen to the elders. Can we use the new digital tools to re-engage younger people in their oral heritage again? My practice-led research uses the medium of animation to evoke life and vitality through movement. I am a storyteller, and the research methodology that I encounter demands that I must review the concepts of authenticity in the productions that I create. For this work, I revisit the function of the stories to ask myself how they should be adapted for animation. Projecting marginalized voices in a contemporary way, empowering perspectives and worldviews, supporting resilience, restore, revitalize, review, and enliven. Animation was not always a channel for merchandising. As it was used by artists such as Jan Schwankmeyer, the Quay brothers, and others, it unsettled the main story. I consider the process, the transformative power of the shaman of the story and of the process of animating the story. It is not only translation, but transformation in the presentation of something heard to something seen, from the oral retelling to the audio-visual, from the mother tongue to English, from one context to another. The Wanchos keep their narratives alive. They struggle to maintain their traditions and language. We have recently co-authored a book, Myth, Memory and Folktale of the Wancho tribe of Arunachal Pradesh, and we are working to bring out the Wancho language version. We have also organized workshops and made films. We will see 2 short films from the Tales of the Tribes series, stories told in their own mother tongue. Apatani for the Abutani story from Arunachal Pradesh, and Tenidie for the man-tiger spirit story from Nagaland. I'm also showing the end of the story, which is about my experiences in the Andaman Islands. The aim of this work is the rebuilding and revitalizing of indigenous ways of knowing. If animism is an antitype to the disenchanted, objectified, reified world of modernity, the storytellers, if they are available, will rejuvenate a disenchanted world.